I've done lots of Thousand Year Door challenges where my attacks are made weaker, only one of my characters can attack, or I'm not able to use certain kinds of attacks, etc, etc. But what if I wasn't allowed to attack at all? Like, not even a little bit. I'm going to try to beat Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door without ever selecting the jump, hammer, or partner attacks option in the battle menu at all. I'm going to jump into it really fast this time because the rules are pretty self-explanatory, but real quick, I just wanted to remind anybody who enjoys my content to check and make sure you're subscribed. Ever since I started adding these reminders to my videos, I've realized that there's a few channels I like watching that I've forgotten to subscribe to myself, so if that applies to you with my channel, then make sure you click that button because it genuinely helps me keep making these videos. There's only one way to defeat Lord Crump without attacking, and it's everybody's favorite 3-frame technique. Without being able to jump or hammer, all I can do is super guard Lord Crump 5 times until he dies. Defending makes it so that he isn't even able to damage you if you miss the super guard, so this fight is completely free, even more free than normal. Now you're all probably pretty used to me brute forcing my way through some of these difficult challenges by super guarding over and over, so this time I'm going to shake things up a little bit. Besides the Lord Crump fight right here, I'm not going to use a single super guard for the entire rest of the game. I don't want Mario or his partner to ever damage an enemy by making contact with them. This time around, we're going to be keeping our hands completely clean. Normal guards are much easier to execute and make it so that I have to rely much more on strategy and planning than I do on hitting precise inputs. So that makes the solution to the rest of the prologue pretty straightforward. All I had to do was buy a handful of fire flowers from the shop so that I actually had a source of damage. At this point in the game, items are my only method of dealing damage under these conditions since you don't unlock a special move that deals damage until completing Chapter 1. I took out the Goomba trio with a fire flower and then made sure to avoid the Goombas in the sewers. These early battles just aren't worth it at all due to the resources they cost, so it's much better to just avoid them and make up the experience later. Showing my map to the Thousand Year Door gives me Sweet Treat, which is much stronger than any of the early game healing items and doesn't take up any of our precious 10 inventory slots. Having Sweet Treat in my back pocket lets me focus my money and inventory on damaging items while still having a good option to heal, which is fantastic. Next, I took on the Big Blooper, and fire flowering him 4 times is enough to take out his 12 health. Since the first fire flower knocks him down and stuns him, he doesn't even get a chance to attack. Easy peasy. Now this chapter is going to be super interesting because like I mentioned before, you don't get a damaging special move until it's complete. So let's crack open our wallets and crack open some skulls. I ignored every Goomba in Petal Meadows for the exact same reasons as the ones in the prologue, and when I got to Petalburg, I bought plenty of fire flowers and a couple POW blocks before heading towards Schwank Fortress. Killing the Baldclefs and Bristles with a POW block each is already pretty standard. It's pretty much what the game intends for you to do casually anyways. Once in the fortress, I slipped past the optional fuzzies to get the Sun and Moon stones, and for the 2 required battles against 4 fuzzies, I used a fire flower to melt them away in a single turn. After that is Gold Fuzzy, who's obviously not difficult, but still unconventional to fight this way. Normal guards foil all the attacks that he and his fuzzy horde can throw at me, so I just used 4 fire flowers to deal enough to bring him from 10 health to 0. This fight leveled me up for the first time, and I decided to pick badge power so I could use some defensive options a little bit later. Something to note about this challenge is that there's no reason to ever level up FP since the only things that use FP are attacks and double dip. Oh, and speaking of double dip, I also decided to ban that badge for this challenge. Being able to use 2 or even 3 items per turn more than outweighs the lack of normal abilities, and I didn't think that would be very interesting. Anyways, after heading back, Koops joined my party like he normally does, but this doesn't really do anything for me right now. Without being able to attack, every partner is almost identical. Koops has 1 extra defense, but he's able to be knocked over, so it kinda balances out. Flurry and Vivian are immune to earthquake type attacks, but beyond those minor differences, the only thing that different partners offer are slightly different amounts of health. Onto Hooktail Castle, there's this inconvenient pile of bones in the way, so unfortunately I did have to use up some items. A Fire Flower and POW block does 5 damage, which is a perfect kill on red bones, and honestly I do it this way in pretty much every challenge playthrough anyways, so there isn't actually much to complain about in terms of item usage. And after that, I actually turned right back around and left Hooktail Castle because I needed to stock up my inventory again. If you watched my minimum turns playthrough, you'd remember that there's no other battles left in the castle that I'm required to finish besides Hooktail herself, so I decided it would be more efficient to prepare my inventory for her now instead of backtracking through more of the castle later. Hooktail presents a little bit of a problem here. She has 20 health during her first phase and 10 health during her second phase. The strongest items that I can buy right now are still Fire Flowers, which do 3 damage each. Bringing 10 Fire Flowers would give me an exact 30 damage, but the problem is the way the phases are split. To kill the first phase, I'd have to use 7 Fire Flowers to break 20 damage, but then I'd only have 3 left for the second phase, which would only only deal 9. Basically, I needed a stronger item, and the only way to get one of those this early in the game is through shop points. The reward for reaching 50 shop points is a Thunder Rage, which is an item that deals 5 damage to every enemy instead of 3. I already had a decent chunk of shop points, so it wouldn't take too many purchases to get the rest of the way. You can buy Sleepy Sheep in Rogueport and then sell them for a profit in Petalburg to gain shop points without losing money, but it takes forever, so I just bought and sold Tasty Tonics over and over at a 2 coin loss per in order to earn my Thunder Rage. Money is surprisingly not going to be that big of an issue for this challenge, since I can sell any badge that has anything to do with attacking for pretty big money at the badge shop. With 9 fire flowers and 1 tiny little lightning bolt in hand, I sprinted back to Hooktail Castle and grinded through the rest of the dungeon. Once I got to Hooktail, it was just a matter of unloading my pockets all over her face. I can't actually benefit from the cricket sound effect badge due to the whole point of this challenge and all that, so Hooktail's attacks do quite a bit of damage even through guards. Luckily, I'm able to wear her down with fire flowers pretty quickly, but Sweet Treat is necessary to heal up once my characters get low. When all was said and done, the math did in fact math, and I took Hooktail out just fine. With Earth Tremor unlocked, I'm no longer completely tied to using items for every fight, so things will probably be a little more interesting from here on out. Before heading in the direction of Bogley Woods, I had a few errands to run in Rogueport. I sold a couple more badges, and I bought a shooting star from Charlieton. His inventory never restocks, so this is the only one that I can buy, but it'll go a long way earlier in the game compared to later, so I figured I would blow that load early, so to speak. Next, I hit up the Pianta Parlor to do a little bit of gambling. I could grind money and buy a ton of Piantas, get lucky or good with the slot machine timing, or even unlock a minigame and grind Piantas that way, but I just decided to use save states to cheese the slot machine instead. In my opinion, if it saves time without changing the actual difficulty of the challenge, then it's pretty much fair game. With a few hundred illegally earned gambling winnings, I bought several Super Appeal and Refund badges. I thought Refund would be fun since I'm using so many items, but after getting all of those, I looked it up and realized that there's very diminishing returns when you stack more than one of them. The Super Appeals, though, are going to be incredibly important. A Super Appeal gives an extra 1/4 of a star power per appeal, and the badges stack completely linearly. Simply put, the more of these you use, the easier it will be to recover star power and spam special moves. For now, though, that was all the Super Appeals I grabbed before heading into Bogley Woods. In the sewers right before starting the chapter, you can also get a damage dodge badge. This badge adds 1 defense to Mario's normal guard, which normally isn't very useful to me since I try to super guard everything anyways, but in this case it's actually going to be tremendously helpful. Every guard is pretty easy to hit because the timing window is super generous, so this is essentially a cheap defense buff. Moving on, even though I can kill regular enemies with Earth Tremor to conserve resources, it takes forever and doesn't give that much experience, so I just kept ignoring them. I used what I learned from the minimum turns run and killed the Shadow Sirens in a single turn using an Earth Tremor and then a Shooting Star. And then the stage backdrop even fell on their corpses just to shame them even harder. Do better next time. I got my second level up and chose badge power so that I could use more of those super appeals I talked so much about a moment ago. And speaking of super appeals, there's actually a copy of Super Appeal P in this chest in Flurry's bedroom. Super Appeal Ps can't be earned infinitely from the Pianta Parlor or any other source, so this is my only chance to get a little extra star power from partner appeals for now. Immediately after heading into the tree, Mario gets ambushed by 2 X-Nauts, and luckily my star power was back up to full from leveling up, so I killed them with an Earth Tremor. The next required X-Naut took a little bit of appealing against to build back up to an Earth Tremor, but his damage is pretty unimpressive, so it didn't matter. The only other interesting part of the tree were these Piters right here. When they lunge down, they scare the Punies, and it knocks several of them down and out of your party. Normally killing them would be a super easy way to get past this obstacle, I mean that's what you're intended to do, but I couldn't figure out a way to initiate an encounter with them without also first striking them. I didn't want to attack enemies at all, even if it was a first strike, so I had to resort to skipping them instead. It's pretty cumbersome to do, but with some luck and good timing, you can get enough Punies across to win the Jabai fight, get them stuck at this pillar, and then slowly work the stragglers over. The more important thing you can access from this room, however, is the Bogley Woods item shop. This shop sells one of the best items for this entire challenge: HP Drain. Not to be confused with HP Drain, the badge, of course. Not sure why they named them the same thing, but go off. This item not only deals a huge 5 damage to a single target, but it also heals the user for 5 damage. Being able to combine healing and damage into a single action is so strong, honestly maybe too strong for this early in the game. I bought as many as I could afford, filling up half of the shop storage and my entire inventory. This way I wouldn't have to come back all the way to this shop in the Great Tree and restock later. On to Magnus von Grapple. This guy is definitely easier than Hooktail in this challenge since I wasn't able to nerf her attack with the cricket badge. He has the same amount of health but in one phase instead of 2 this time, and I have those HP drain items up the wazoo. I entered the fight without any star power since I had to use an Earth Tremor to take out the X-Nauts during the tree escape sequence, so I opened with a couple HP drains instead. This already takes out a third of his health on the first turn, and in exchange he deals an entire 1 damage to me. Another pair of HP drains brings him to 10, and instead of attacking, he chooses to spawn his rocket fists this time. Now if you pass kindergarten, you probably noticed that I can just kill him right here with a couple more HP drains, and luckily I passed kindergarten too. So I did exactly that, and he went down after only dealing a single point of damage against me total. Not much is unlocked between Chapter 2 and 3, so we can keep the pregame pretty brief. I unlocked the Clock Out special move from Chapter 2, but honestly it's not very useful when it costs the same resource as my best damage output, so that doesn't mean much for this challenge. I just sold some more badges to get my money up, and then I took the cheap blimp to Glitzville. The shop in Glitzville has Thunderbolts and Earthquakes, which are both really strong items. The Thunderbolt is basically an HP drain but without the lifesteal, so I can use those in places where I don't need lifesteal to save the harder to come by items for later. Earthquakes deal 5 damage to every enemy, which is fantastic, but it comes with the asterisk that it doesn't affect flying enemies. Still though, these tools are going to help optimize the shit out of the Glitz Pit. And speaking of the Glitz Pit, let's get started. This part of the game is always super interesting in the strategy heavy runs since it's purely about planning and optimizing. None of these fights give you a huge risk of losing, but getting through them as quickly and smoothly as possible is a good reward in and of itself. Grubba's fight conditions add an extra layer of complexity as always, but unlike some other challenges I've done, there aren't really any automatic loss conditions this time. Don't use items or don't use special moves are about as bad as it gets, but I can make up for the lack of one by using the other. The Goomba Bros were simple with an appeal and an Earth Tremor. I'm definitely going to be using Earth Tremor as much as I can so I don't have to use as many items, so you better get used to seeing the big star make the stage all swooshy. Since I leveled up from the Goombas, I had full start power to Earth Tremor the KP Koopas right away. I Earthquaked the Pokies, Earthquaked the Dolboneses, and Earth Tremored the Lakitu since I got the use a special move condition anyways. I killed the bandits with a couple Earthquakes while also sneaking in some extra appeals to heal star power for the future. Earth Tremor is the obvious solution to the Boggly Woods Funky Bunch since 2 of them are immune to Earthquake items. Next, Grubba hit me with take damage 3 times against the Hyper Bald Clefs, so I screwed around and appealed a bit before taking them out with an Earth Tremor. These guys can do quite a bit of damage, but since you get to heal between each fight, it really isn't a big deal. Against the Bob-Ombs, I grabbed a free appeal with Mario before taking them out with an Earthquake. This free appeal thing is going to become a common theme throughout this run since star power is such an important resource. There's lots of times where enemies only take 1 move or 1 item to kill, so it's absolutely worth it to sandwich an appeal in between since that character wouldn't do anything otherwise. And now, we reach that awkward moment in challenge runs like this. Some rule sets aren't affected by it, like partners only or level 0, but others like no action commands or this one that you're watching right now are. Oh, I'm talking about the Iron Clefs, by the way. The only way to damage them is to use a gulp attack with Yoshi. There isn't any other method to pierce their infinite defense, so I am forced to break the rules for this fight. I've gotten the comments before, you can technically skip doing this fight with a series of glitches and sequence breaks, but I do all of my challenge runs glitchless anyways. A lot of this game's glitches are either really difficult, version specific, or both, and I think it's a lot more fun to play through the game properly under challenge conditions rather than playing with glitches. So I hit them with a gulp, did a sweet treat, burned a turn to fulfill Grubba's condition, and then finally finished them off with 1 more gulp. It's always really annoying to have to create exceptions to challenge rules because it feels like it undermines the whole thing a little bit, but luckily this is the only exception throughout the entire game. Many people in the Thousand Year Door community are already used to treating this fight like the cutscene that it basically is, so we'll just brush it off and move on. On to the second half of the Glitz Pit. For some reason I was put up against the Bristle duo first, which doesn't usually happen, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. An Earth Tremor kills them now just like it would if it was the next battle or 10 battles from now. Next, Grubba hit me with a don't use items condition. This forces me to appeal a couple times so I can afford to Earth Tremor and take out these red spike tops. The Shady Koopas can be a tricky fight to optimize, and in this case I didn't grab the 1-turn kill, but that was only because I was low on star power. On the first turn I used the Ice Storm that I grabbed in the Major League locker room, and then I appealed with Mario to build up for an Earth Tremor next turn. The Iron Cleft rematch always happens after this fight, but I had promised promised that there would be no more exceptions to the rules in this video, and I intend to keep that promise, damn it. Running away from this fight not only doesn't count as a game over, but it also doesn't even give you any consequences for progression in the Glitz Pit. Grubba got bored of me item spamming or something and gave me don't use items again, this time against the fuzzies, but that really isn't an issue since I can appeal and Earth Tremor on the second turn. I didn't even take any damage since the first fuzzy only has one attack, the second one duplicated, and the third one only stole a couple FP, which is useless to me anyways. I didn't have any items left that could target everything and also hit flying, and I also didn't feel like going back to Rogueport to buy any of them, so I just toughed out an extra turn against the Magikoopas. I used an Earthquake and Thunderbolt on the first turn to bring them all down to 2, and then I finished them next turn with an Earth Tremor. I ran away from the Bowser fight just like I did with the Ironclef rematch since I didn't want to use up my items on an optional boss, and because I was feeling particularly lazy at that moment. Don't let your partner attack is a very vague condition when you think about it. What does it mean for your partner to attack? Obviously, we can agree that a head bonk or a shell toss counts as an attack, but what about things like super guards or items? Well, obviously, if it were up to me, I'd say that using items shouldn't count as attacking because that's kind of the entire premise of this video. I killed the Dark Craw with a combination of Thunderbolts used by Goombella and Earth Tremors from Mario. His attack is high, but I can kill him long before he gets a chance to leverage that attack against me. A couple more Thunderbolts on the second turn takes out Dark Craw after only taking a single hit from him. And then next up is Dark Craw. Yeah, it turns out Grubba and I don't exactly see eye to eye on what counts as an attack or not. Luckily, I had just restocked my inventory with Thunderbolts during the last email intermission thingy, so I was able to spam him with those again and take him out for the second time. After this fight, I finally upgraded Mario's HP for the first time in the run since I was pretty much out of useful badges to equip for the time being. The Squadron of Bros is luckily all pretty chill and very grounded, so an Earth Tremor and Earthquake can take them all out in a single turn. Grubba was once again bored of the item meta and forced me to use a special move against the Red Chomps, so I appealed and gave in to his sick, twisted desires. Against the Dark Koopa Patrol, I had to sit idle for the first 3 turns, so I spammed appeal and got more than enough star power to fully heal it. From there, Thunderbolts and Earth Tremors were able to chip away at him and take him out before he was able to wear my health down too far. Finally, we arrive at Rockhawk. He's always just been the warm-up for Macho Grubba, but challenges that slow the game down a little bit help put a little respect on his name. I started off with a Thunderbolt and Earth Tremor, and then he hit Goombella for a big, juicy 1 damage. I totally forgot to mention this, but during Chapter 2, there's a hidden block that has a P down, D up, P badge in it. Normally, this badge is pretty bad during a standard playthrough of the game, but this is not a standard playthrough, if you haven't noticed. Since I'm not allowed to attack anyways, this badge is basically a dirt cheap Defend Plus. I've been using it on and off up to this point, but from here onwards the badge was a mainstay in my loadout. That, combined with the damage dodge badges that I have for each character, makes my team pretty tanky for this early in the game. I kept Thunderbolting with Goombella as if she were Pikachu, and with Mario I decided to appeal and Earth Tremor back and forth instead. Since Rockhawk's damage isn't much of a threat, I figured I'd save the expendable resources. Something funny to point out is that Rockhawk's ceiling phase just doesn't matter at all in this challenge, since all of my attack options are able to hit him regardless of where he's at. Eventually, after spamming Rockhawk with my items and Earth Tremors, he goes down. Next, I went back and restocked my inventory from the last few fights in preparation for Macho Grubba. I kept it simple and brought 6 Thunderbolts and 4 HP drains. Then I went and rummaged through Grubba's desk, chased him to the arena, and saved my game. Something that you might not know or might not remember about this game is once you chase Grubba out of his office, the guards actually block you from leaving this area of the Glitz Pit. So, by saving my game here, I was locked into facing Grubba down with the items I had on me and nothing else. However, I was pretty confident I'd be able to beat him. The beginning of this fight always starts off tame since Grubba's first turn just sets up status for later turns. 3 Thunderbolts and an Earth Tremor already puts a solid dent in him before he starts laying down some damage, and then luckily for me he chose to buff his defense instead of his attack. Normally him buffing his defense is really annoying because it slows down how much damage you can do to him, but in this case it's optimal because all items and special moves completely ignore defense. I used another Thunderbolt and then appealed with Mario since I would have to use at least 1 more Earth Tremor to do enough damage to him. My inventory was full of 10 items that deal 5 damage each, and since Grubba has 60 health, I have to supplement that extra 10 with special moves. I kept up the item spam and used a couple more Earth Tremors, and honestly the damage he dealt back to me was pretty insignificant, so he went down pretty easily. He did hit Mario and Goombella for a super strong boosted attack towards the end of the fight, but at that point he was in kill range anyways, so it didn't matter. Grubba is a massive obstacle in some challenge runs, but in the case of this one, he was perfectly reasonable. Finishing this chapter unlocks the Power Lift special move, which is normally one of my most beloved, but in this challenge I can only benefit from the defense buffs, which are honestly just too expensive to be worthwhile. And speaking of reasonable, next up on the chopping block is Chapter 4 and Dupless. Before heading off to Twilight Town, I restocked the good old inventory with a bunch of Thunderbolts. Once you defeat Dupless for the first time, you're trapped in Twilight Town until the end of the chapter, and the only attack item for sale there are Thunder Rages, which definitely work, but they're a lot more expensive. I also made sure to sell a few valuable badges that I had been holding on to, so between my smart shopping and that selling, my wallet was looking pretty thick and juicy right now. In Twilight Town, you're given a free Defend Plus in the storeroom, so I made sure to add that to Mario's arsenal. Between that and Damage Dodge, Mario has effectively 3 defense. As per usual, I slipped past all the Twilight Trail enemies for the entire chapter because they'd wear down my inventory pretty quickly, and like I keep mentioning, it's way more efficient to grind levels in the late game to make up for skipped battles now. I also decided to not try fighting the Atomic Boo for item conserving reasons since he's optional. So on to Dupless Part 1. Dupless's first phase is very similar in difficulty to Rock Hawk, which wasn't very high before Mario got an extra defense. Both my characters have 3 defense when guarding, and Dupless's attack is only 4, so it's kind of like getting slapped across the face with a wet napkin every turn. After lots of Thunderbolts and a couple HP drains, he sadly passes away, only to come back slightly later under a new name and pronouns. The fight against Dupless Phase 2 is slightly more interesting since you start the first 2 turns without a partner while Dupless has one for the entire fight. Something worth noting here that I learned in a previous challenge run is that your equipped badges do not apply to Vivian during this fight since she joins partway into it. There wasn't really much else I had that was useful, but if I did, then I could use it. Cool, I guess. Anyways, I opened the fight with a double Earth Tremor since I have a total of 4 SP now, and this did a good chunk of health to Dupless and even to Goombella just to flex. The partners don't even add additional difficulty to this fight since it's almost more difficult to miss the guards against them than it is to hit them, and their attack is low enough that they do no damage when I do guard. Since I used up most of my Thunderbolts on the previous phase, I had shown up with an inventory full of Thunder Rages instead, so this let me grab a couple free kills on Goombella and Koops just for fun. Once Dupless got down to 8 health, I used a random Ice Storm that I had, and then since the fight was so easy, I wasted an extra turn appealing and using a final Earth Tremor to save my last few HP drains. If not for this unnecessary extra turn, I would have gotten through this fight having only taken 2 damage. Dupless has never been the strongest Link in this game's boss roster, but he's cool as hell, so I guess we can forgive it. By selling some more useless badges from Chapter 4, I was able to reach the big 999 coins for the first time in the run, and using some of that cheddar, I bought a second Damage Dodge badge that's now available from the badge shop. This brings Mario's guarded defense up to 4 if I have all of my defense badges equipped, which is still really strong for this point in the game. I'm generally a glass cannon sort of player, as you may have seen in previous videos, so I tend to forget just how overpowered defense is in the mid-game. It makes the fights easier, but definitely a lot slower, which is why I lean towards the attack buffs normally. The other major upgrade I gained from completing Chapter 4 is Art Attack. This special move is kind of janky since you have to trace around your enemies' invisible hitboxes to deal damage to them, but for only 4 SP it has the potential to do about twice as much damage as Earth Tremor to every enemy, or even more than double on a single target. Using this, I finally took down Gus, who was blocking the way to Bobry's house, and I was able to kill him in a single turn by dealing 15 with Art Attack and then 5 with an HP drain. On to Keelhaul Key, these little blue fire ghost guys ambushed us at camp, so I used a Thunder Rage and Earth Tremor to kill them before they could do any damage. Something that I've always found hilarious and ridiculous about this game is the fact that not only is this bitch charging us money to sleep in this little hut when we're shipwrecked and stranded on this island, but also that it costs more than the inn at Rogueport. I get her making a business out of it after the chapter is over because we're able to travel back and forth, but right now we are currently stranded and she's still worried about making money off me. Despicable. I used an item and Earth Tremor again to take out this set of embers that were threatening to end Bobry's life, and then after some negotiations with everybody's favorite terrible person, I ventured into Pirate's Grotto. Not much happened in here, there were just some Bill Blasters that I took out with some Earth Tremors, and one more set of embers that you have to fight to get the key for the final curse chest. There's also a P down D up for Mario tucked away in the back of the chest room, so that gives Mario another even cheaper defense buff, which is hilarious considering my defense was already overpowered. There's also a defense defend plus P hidden behind this waterfall over here, and even though I can't afford it right now, I made sure to grab it to use later potentially. Cortez, similar to Dupless, mostly fails to live up to Macho Grubba in terms of strength. He might technically be a little bit stronger, but now that I have art attack and some more defense, it's pretty irrelevant that his attack is slightly higher. And speaking of art attack, I opened the fight with it and did a pretty pathetic amount of damage while trying to figure out what his hitbox actually was. With that, a couple items, and an earth tremor, I blasted through phase 1 without taking any damage. On phase 2, I used a few items with Goombella while appealing with Mario to heal my star power back up for phase 3. Cortez's attacks only managed to take a few health off both my characters, so I finished this phase still pretty healthy. My inventory was fairly sparse going into the last phase since I didn't restock the few items I used throughout the grotto, so I started off with a Thunder Rage to temporarily disable Cortez's weapons, and then I tried to finish him with an art attack. Unfortunately, I fell just 2 health short, and then he consumed the literal souls of half my audience and healed back up to 20. I appealed while Cortez used his underwhelming attacks, and then once the weapons came back up, I used an earth tremor to knock all of them out and do just a little bit more damage to Cortez. I was completely out of items at this point, so I was relying entirely on damage from special moves to get the job done. I decided to let the weapons stay active for a turn since I could brush off pretty much all of the damage with guards, and that let me save up for another art attack to bring Cortez down to just 2 health. Finally, one more appeal from Goombella gave me the sauce that I needed to afford a final earth tremor and finish off Cortez. Once again, the fight wasn't super difficult, but it was interesting to see a scenario where I'm out of items and have to rely entirely on special moves to win. Lord Crump was threatening to blow us all up with cannons or something, but I decided to step away from that for a second to do a little bit of shopping. I bought 5 ice storms and then pulled 5 HP drains out of the National Archives. After that, I took to Cortez's ship and engaged Mr. Crump himself. I started out by just using an ice storm with each of my characters on the first turn, which killed the X-Naut pile and froze Crump. On the next turn, I used an HP drain and an art attack, which knocked him down to just 1 health already since he has a small hitbox and is easy to hit repeatedly. For some reason, he's allowed to just cheat and summon his X-Naut Sealing Division even though he's encased in a giant block of ice, and then, not only that, but he has the audacity to return to his normal idle animation while still frozen. Thanks, game. His freeze then wore off, dealing 1 more damage to him and finishing the first phase. With all my defense increases that I have equipped, even the X-Naut ball attack, which is pretty notoriously strong, only does 3 total damage, so this phase is pretty easy to clean up. I threw a few items at him with Bobbery since, of course, that's all my partners are useful for, and then with Mario I did some appealing to save up for another art attack. I hit him with it, knocking him down to 4, and then on the next turn I picked him off with 1 final HP drain. This chapter is always a nice break since it's the shortest in the game when you know what you're doing, and there's only a single required fight for us to do. The new things available to us now include an extra damage dodge P and super appeal P from the badge shop, which both stack nicely with the copies I already have. I also did unlock Sweet Feast after defeating Cortez, which I forgot to mention, but that move won't be useful quite yet anyways since I haven't needed any huge heals. So let's just cut all the bullshit and skip way ahead to the Smorg fight. Smorg is always one of my favorite bosses in any challenge run since it's one of the only fights that has a hidden weak point behind smaller enemies. Luckily, items and multi-target attacks are usually exactly what you want to use for this fight anyways, so it shouldn't be too bad. I filled my inventory with mostly Thunder Rages, but also some HP drains beforehand, which are perfect for taking out all the tentacles in one go. After that, I'm able to art attack the weak point, which I had a hard time figuring out the hitbox on, so I didn't do too much damage. I lit it up with another Thunder Rage and an Earth Tremor, which brought it to 33 health. I guarded some good hits from it and then appealed and used a Thunder Rage to take out the tentacles again. Some HP drains dropped it to 23, which makes it respawn the claw appendage instead of the tentacles. The claw does do a pretty hefty amount of damage, but it's pretty easy to stay on top of with HP drains. I appealed and then used an Earth Tremor, which not only takes out the claw, but also damages the Smorg. I didn't know this for a long time, but the Smorg is actually not invincible when the claw is active the same way that it is with the tentacles. With the claw temporarily down, this Shy Guy hopped up on stage and dropped a bucket onto the Smorg for 1 damage, and funnily enough, this actually helped me get a pretty efficient kill. I used a couple more HP drains to knock it down to just 6 health and heal me back up, and then finally I appealed and used an Earth Tremor, which picked off the Smorg's final 6 health. I ended with only 7 health left on each character, which is the most damage I've taken from a fight so far, but luckily this one is short enough that it didn't become too much of an issue. Still though, shoutouts for HP Drain, this one not that one, for being incredibly overpowered. The badge is just pretty okay. Chapter 7 is another really fun one in the context of challenge runs because once again, it's really short once you know what to do, but in this case, Magnus von Grapple 2.0 is an even greater threat. The rest of the chapter is pretty boring with only one other required encounter, so let's focus on Crump's final stand instead. I pulled up to the function with 6 shooting stars and 4 HP drains, which is a good mix of high spread damage for the rocket fists and passive health recovery. Right away, I opened with an art attack that did 11 damage, and I appealed with Bobry this turn and next turn so I could afford a second art attack on the second turn. When defended, Magnus doesn't do too much damage, but it can add up quickly if left unchecked or especially unblocked. The second art attack got him to 48 health, and then he spawned his rocket fists. A shooting star took care of them like I was prepared for, and then I went back to appealing in order to use another art attack. Just like with some previous fights, the math didn't add up for me to use purely items, so I wanted to make sure to get lots of good damage in with special moves. Once he got low enough, he unleashed his special technique. He's pulling his cock out! But for once, it actually wasn't a huge threat since I have a defensive build going on. He hit me with the first 3 hits of it, but after that, I calibrated and blocked the other 7, so I only took 6 damage from one of the strongest attacks in the game. I kept up my item usage for a bit, and he didn't use the crowd cannon attack again, so I was able to pick him off after a couple more turns. This fight could have been much harder if not for my high defense and the fact that I was properly prepared, but I did in fact have those things, so GG. Okay, I'll admit it. I have been coasting through the game relatively easily up to this point. I haven't really had any close calls on any of the bosses, and I've been able to leverage the game's relatively strong items super well. I mean, we've had HP drains since Chapter 2, and they were still going strong against the Chapter 7 boss. Chapter 8, though, turns this challenge from a sprint into more of a marathon. I had thought about playing the first 50 floors of the Pit of 100 Trials in order to unlock the Strange Sack so that I could hold twice as many items and make these fights a lot easier, but after seeing how relatively easy the rest of the game was, I decided to finally make the rule official. No using the Strange Sack. I'd have to get through all of these incredibly strong bosses with just 10 items and a few special moves. First up is Dark Bones, who definitely does not fall under the category of incredibly strong bosses that I mentioned, but he's trying his best. I hit the whole squadron with a supernova, which deals 15 damage, and then I burned Yoshi's next turn and finished Dark Bones off with an Earth Tremor the next turn. I could have used an item for a one-turn kill, but I wanted to save those items for the next boss, who is actually a threat, Gloomtail. This guy is way stronger than anything we've fought so far for a few reasons, but the main one is that his primary attack, the Stinky Poo Poo Dragon Breath, pierces defense. For some reason in the game's code, the P down D up badges still apply despite defense piercing, but my damage dodges and defend pluses are useless against the breath attack, as well as his ground shake and mega breath attacks. Every turn he chooses to use his breath, which is more often than not, both of my characters will take 6 damage when blocked, and that is as strong as the Smorg was during only its last phase. Another thing that makes Gloomtail a lot more difficult than other bosses is his gargantuan size. His art attack hitbox is absolutely massive, so it's hard to deal good damage with that attack. On the first turn, I used Art Attack and traced around trying to figure out if any specific parts of him counted as his hitbox, but nope, it's the whole goddamn dragon. Because of this, I swapped to using Earth Tremors instead, which are cheaper and do a consistent 6 damage every time. Like with previous fights, getting good damage with special attacks is important because my inventory can do a little over 50 damage total, almost 30 shy of what I actually need to get the job done. If I had a Strange Sack, then I could just pack 20 HP drains and spam those for a relatively easy victory, but I had already committed to doing things the hard way. A couple breath attacks already drops my health pretty low, which isn't helped by the fact that my max HP is so damn low. I've been picking badge power for most of my level ups throughout the game, and I neglected to rank up any of my partners besides Goombella this whole time since I was trying to make this challenge more difficult for myself. After a few turns of using some special moves and using HP drains to heal both my characters back up a tiny bit, I dropped Gloomtail to 47 health. At this point, I realized that not filling my inventory entirely with HP drains was a huge mistake because I ran out with over half of Gloomtail's health left to go. This forced me to swap to Sweet Treats for my healing while still being able to sneak in some damage with Bobry. But to use Sweet Treats, I also had to balance appealing with damage. Mario's appeals were still far more valuable due to the extra super appeal badges, but Bobry had to put in some work also. I got mostly healed back up, but then Gloomtail unlocked his ground shake attack, which also happens to pierce defense, dealing 2 more damage to each character than the breath attack does, which is fantastic. I managed to build up more star power, which gave me a larger safety net for sweet treats. The problem with that though is that if I'm unlucky and Gloomtail uses his ground shake attack too much, he can deal damage as fast or even faster than I can heal. Like seriously, I healed up right here and then he immediately dropped both my characters back into danger. This Boo, for some reason, saw this massive display of strength and thought Gloomtail needed another advantage, so he tried to turn him invisible, but luckily Gloomtail can't have that status anyways. I was healing my absolute heart out, but I got unlucky with Gloomtail's attack patterns and went down for the first time in this challenge. It feels like Gloomtail is always where I run into my first game over in these challenges, which I think speaks to just how ridiculously strong he can be. I could have gone back and added more HP drains to my inventory, but since I already knew that I had multiple restock trips coming up due to the later bosses, I wanted to give it another go with the same inventory since I had some more intel. I understood that I needed to be a little more aggressive with sweet treats and rely more on the items in my pockets for damage. I did have to deal around 30 using special moves, but that shouldn't be too hard to do. I tried an art attack one more time at the start of the fight, but only managed to do 5, which is still weaker than an earth tremor, so I swore off that move for the rest of the fight. This time I wanted to make sure that only Bobry used my HP drains and that he stayed in the front slot. This way he could soak up the single target attacks like the stomp or the bite, and then I could sweet treat after the double target attacks. This basically relegated Mario to appealing or sweet treating every turn with the rare earth tremor when I got a lucky break in Gloomtail's attacks. This strategy was very slow, but it allowed me to stay afloat in terms of health. Mario barely got a chance to do anything other than sweet treat or appeal, but luckily his appeals would give me about 2 full star power thanks to all my badges, so that would put a couple sweet treats in the bank each time. Eventually I had worked Gloomtail down to 26 health and I still had another 10 damage worth of items in reserve. He unleashed his Mega Breath attack, which does a ton of damage, but since he has to spend a turn charging it up, it's about as dangerous as him using the breath and ground shake attack back to back. I had to work my way back up from the brink of death after he used it though, which slowed my progress on his health to a grinding halt. As long as he kept using the breath attack, I'd have to appeal with Bobry and sweet treat with Mario, so this fight turned into a waiting game. He used the breath attack 3 times in a row and then charged up for another Mega Breath, which is basically 2 more turns of him using the breath attack. After all that, he charged up for a second Mega Breath in a row, forcing me to do even more healing for 2 more turns. Finally though, after 7 turns of just barely keeping myself alive, I caught a break and used the bite attack not just once, but twice in a row, which does so much less damage and finally let me deal some damage to him back. An earth tremor brings him to 15 health, and then my luck continued and he used a stomp attack, which Mario can guard and barely take any damage from. I appealed a couple times to build my star power back up, and he used another bite, which lets me stay ahead on health and grab another earth tremor on him. A breath attack knocks Bobry to 1 health and Mario to 3, but Gloomtail only has 4 health left, so I'm able to appeal with Bobry and use 1 final earth tremor to take Gloomtail down. This single fight took me over 20 minutes to get through because I essentially had to wait to get lucky enough to be able to do damage. It would have been easier if I had more HP drains or if I had quick change or something to swap out partners for more free health, but honestly it was really rewarding to do this with my current loadout, so I'm pretty happy. I grabbed the Ultra Shroom and Jam and Jelly in this room over here, but only so I could sell them for more cash once I was back in Rogueport. Speaking of, I probably should have gone back now to grab more items since I was completely out of attacking items, but I wanted to see if I could kill the Shadow Sirens using only special moves just for fun. I made sure to kill enough enemies that I leveled up before doing this fight, so I'd go in with full star power, and then I entered the encounter. I started with a Supernova right off the bat, which is a guaranteed 15 damage to each enemy without having to worry about tracing around them with the stupid ass art attack. 6 SP in exchange for 45 damage isn't too bad. Mario's 2 defend pluses, P down D up, and 2 damage dodges are actually relevant against these guys since most of their attacks don't pierce defense, and luckily defending also nullifies any statuses they could inflict with their moves. I appealed with Bobry 3 times and Mario once in order to get enough SP for a second Supernova by the 3rd turn. And this finished off Beldum and left Marilyn and Dupless with just 10 health. Marilyn's lightning attack can't be defended and pierces everything besides P down D up, so I did have to sweet treat to heal off one of those. As long as she doesn't charge before using it, I really don't have much to worry about. All that was left for me to do was appeal and earn enough star power to use art attack, which could finish off the last 2. I took another lightning attack to the dome, but since Mario was still in range to survive another, I just swapped Bobry out to Goombella for a brand new pool of health. Marilyn resorted to spamming lightning lightning, which did bring Mario down to 3 health, but it was too late for her since I got enough star power for the art attack. I did the final 10 damage to each that I needed, and then I drew a massive PP over them, so now they were not only dead, but also buried. Finally, after putting it off for an extra fight, I ran back to Rogueport for an inventory restock that I was in desperate need of. As I'm sure most of you remember, the back-to-back Grottus and Bowser fights were coming up, and doing those without any items would either be impossible or actually take hours. After selling a few more badges, I decided to load up with 5 Thunder Rages, 4 HP Drains, and 1 Shooting Star. I also finally gave in and ranked up all of my partners. I just super ranked them. I still didn't feel like going to Hooktail's castle to get the up arrow and unlock ultra ranks, so this is gonna have to do for now. I made my way back through the Palace of Shadow, making sure to leave myself at enough star points to level up after defeating Grottus. I highly recommend doing this in any casual or challenge playthrough that you do. It's just so nice to be refreshed after dealing with Grottus. And speaking of, let's take on Techno Satan himself. Grottus is an absolute menace in some challenges, but in this case, he's slightly weaker than Gloomtail. He has less health, has a small hitbox, and is therefore weak to art attack, and his damage output is a little bit lower. As usual, he's shielded when he has 4 Grottus X's, and he starts the fight that way, but a quick Thunder Rage deletes all of them and leaves him open to an art attack. Due to that small hitbox I mentioned, I'm able to deal 15 damage to him with the first art attack. In exchange, he deals 5 damage to each of my characters, which is slightly weaker than Gloomtail's breath. He respawns 2 Grottus X's after each attack, but using a Thunder Rage when there's 2 of them helps to keep them at bay while also damaging Grottus. I immediately went for another art attack, which is already able to bring him down to 16 health. He then gave himself the direct attack counter status, but apparently he hasn't been paying attention to this video or something, because I have not used a single direct attack for the whole game. What makes him think I'm gonna do it now? Another Thunder Rage drops him to 11, and then I appealed with Mario to gain some star power back. I missed the guard on his Ice Beam attack since it's hard to react to, but Mario still had quite a bit of health, so it wasn't a big deal. He only stayed frozen for 1 turn, and during that turn, Bobbery used another Thunder Rage, bringing Grottus to 6. With 1 more appeal from Bobbery and an unfrozen Mario, I was able to finish Grottus off with 1 last Earth Tremor. Just like I planned, I gained my level up, which fully healed me and gave Mario 30 max HP before going into Bowser. I mean, like going into the Bowser fight, not going into Bowser, that would be weird. Now for this fight, I decided to try something a little bit different. We are of course up against Bowser and Kammy Koopa, who are pretty strong enemies. I mean, look at these stats. Do you notice something funny here though? Bowser and Kammy each have a 5% chance to be hit with the KO effect, which is probably better known as Showstopper. The 2 penultimate bosses of Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door have a not insignificant chance to be deleted by the instant kill move. Since I've never actually tried this before, and since Grottus was easy enough that having to fight him again wouldn't be too bad, I decided to make like February 2nd and go for it. If I was super lucky, I could kill both of them on even the first turn, but I mean the odds are pretty low, so I wasn't counting on it. I started spamming the ever-loving out of Showstopper with Mario's turn and appealed with Bobbery's turn to help my star power last a little bit longer. I used Showstopper 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, but didn't manage to kill them. I was getting pretty low on health from guarding their strong attacks, but I was able to afford 1 more Showstopper, so I stayed committed. After a little bit of Blix, a hint of Yiba, a dash of Blix, a pinch of Yabx, and a heavy dose of Axiax, I managed to grab the free kill on Bowser himself. All of a sudden, those 6 turns spent spamming the move became totally worth it because I essentially did 70 damage. From there, I didn't really want to test my luck any further since it would take 20 Showstoppers on average to roll that 5% chance against 1 enemy, so I appealed a bit and healed Mario and Bobbery way back up with a Sweet Feast. Out of the 2 of them, Kammy is definitely the easier enemy to deal with in this challenge since she wastes a lot of time buffing her defense, giving herself statuses that don't matter, or healing herself for small amounts, and when she does actually attack, it only does 3 damage blocked. I was pretty free to spam appeals and heal my star power back up so I could start unleashing some art attacks on her. Once again, she has a tiny hitbox so I can do a ton of damage to her with it. She set herself invisible, but a fun fact about this game is that special attacks actually ignore invisibility completely. Art attack is still able to damage her normally, even though regular attacks and even items would miss. If you couldn't tell, this fight is completely free when it's only against Kammy, so I'll just fast forward to the part where I kill her and she never again appears characters in the Paper Mario canon. This is truly the end of Kammy Koopa. With this fight over, Mario watches Grotus run further into the palace with Peach, so being the hero that he is, he immediately turns around and leaves. He just wanted to fight Bowser and defeat his arch nemesis and all that, so he has no need for the princess anymore. In seriousness though, I needed to have my inventory fully stocked if I wanted any hope of beating the Shadow Queen. On the way out of the Palace of Shadow, I finally decided to stop being stubborn and unloaded some pent-up showstoppers against lots of regular enemies. I was able to gain like 7 more levels within 30 minutes, which is much faster than if I fought enemies along the way during the story, and I didn't really need the XP until this point. I didn't want to pull any punches during the Shadow Queen though, especially with the amount of pain she put me through in the last challenge. So once I got back to Rogueport, I made sure to grab the up arrow and I ultra ranked most of my partners in order to have more health to go around. I also hit up the Pianta Parlor again for the first time in a while to get more super appeals, since I had a sneaking suspicion more of those was going to be more better. And finally, the inventory that I decided to bring to the final fight against the Shadow Queen herself was 10 HP drains. That's it. No spread damage, no Zest Dynamites, just 10 HP drains. The extra health they're going to give me definitely outweighs the extra 20 damage an inventory full of Zest Dynamite would do, and if I'm going to be relying so heavily on special moves, why not rely on them just a little bit more? And so, here is the final badge loadout. I brought my usual defense badges that I've been using throughout most of the game, as well as more super appeals than ever before. I engaged Shadow Peach and decided that it would be best if I got through this phase without using any of my items, so I had as much HP drainage as possible for the true final boss. Luckily, she once again has a tiny hitbox, so Art Attack shreds her health fairly quickly. Her damage isn't even quite as strong as Gloomtail's was during this phase, and you only need to deal a bit over 60 damage to end it, so I wasn't very worried. Unfortunately, quite a few of her attacks pierce my defense badges, but this won't be a real problem during this phase at least. After 4 art attacks, she gets low enough to enter the invincible portion of our program. In order to end this phase, you have to attempt to damage her 3 times, which luckily still counts with earth tremors. So I just appealed with Bobbery and used a few of those while she threatened to end Bobbery's life. In the end, she actually did kill Bobbery, but I had just enough star power left for the 3rd earth tremor, so I finished phase 1 just fine. And finally, the moment that you've all been waiting for: can you beat the Shadow Queen without attacking her at all? No super guards, no double dip, no strange sack, just 10 items, some special moves, some appeals, and most importantly, a dream. I'm not going to be able to get the freebie Shine Sprite bingo that the game is normally scripted to give you at the beginning of this phase, since you'll never earn any of those without attacking, but luckily audience members start filling in right away. Something worth noting is that a small audience reduces the amount of star power you would gain from attacking, but not from appealing. An appeal will give you the same amount of star power whether there's 1 Piranha Plant or 200 Toads. Another mechanic that makes this fight slightly less hellish is the fact that the Shadow Queen's art attack hitbox actually seems like it's centered around Shadow Peach rather than the entire fucking monster. Using art attack also gives me a chance to take out her hands, which unfortunately only keeps them out for a single turn, but that at least reduces her damage and gives her less of a chance to use her HP draining attack. That attack pierces defense, so even when guarded, each hand has the potential to heal 5 health to her every turn. So knocking out the hands whenever possible is going to be very valuable for staying on top of damaging her and also not letting her heal. Since I started with full star power, I'm able to do the first 50 damage or so to her pretty quickly, but then she grabs a couple super annoying hand heals, bringing her back up to 114. Her big charge up attack is a bit of a threat because it's essentially a health checkpoint. It does 12 blocked to each character, so it's important to sweet treat or even feast whenever she charges up for it. I tried to not use HP drains with Mario too much so he could focus on dealing that 100 plus damage I needed with special moves, but occasionally it was important for him to grab that extra bit of healing. After being locked in a stalemate with her for a bit where I'd get a little bit of damage but then she'd heal it back up with her draining hands, I eventually developed a bit of a rhythm. I would try my best to attack her with special moves whenever her regular hands were active so they couldn't drain me, and then whenever I'd luck out enough for her to summon the dead hands, I would focus on recovering star power and health. The dead hands hit in bursts of smaller damage rather than single big hits, which is exactly what you want when you're using guarding strats. They do little to no damage, so it's the perfect time to recover and prepare to take out the other hands when they come back. Eventually, Bobbery got pretty low on health, so instead of trying to keep healing him, I swapped him out for a fresh item hopper and meat shield. I was favoring art attack for a while since it did really good damage against her while also killing the hands, but after getting her to about half health, I started to realize that earth tremors might not be such a bad idea. Sure, the damage damage is quite a bit slower, but since it's so much cheaper, I can use them more often and keep her source of healing at bay. I may be halfway into the fight in terms of her health, but I assure you that this fight is far from halfway over. My supply of HP drains started to run low, which not only slows down damage from those, but also damage from my special moves. Mario has to spend more time healing, which means that he's attacking the Shadow Queen even less often than he already is. Every time I would manage to get a lot more star power, I'd have to use most of it on a Sweet Feast in order to stay ahead of the Shadow Queen's charge attacks. When I say this fight is slow under these conditions, I'm not shitting you. I ended up having to spend so much time healing and waiting for a lucky break in her attacks that I was doing almost no damage. That was the case with Gloomtail too, but in this fight it was even worse. Take note of the fact that she has 71 health right here. Now fast forward 10 minutes later and I had just got her down to 41. 30 damage in 10 minutes. That's only a fifth of her total health. I'm honestly running out of things to say at this point. All I could do was heal and wait. I was slowly shuffling partners around to bring more fresh health to the table, and for the most part, I was killing her faster than I was running out of partners, so I wasn't too worried about it. Eventually, I knocked her down to just 16 health. I decided to play aggressively in order to prevent another 10 hours of beating around the bush. With just 8 health on Mario and 6 left on Yoshi, I decided to go for an Earth Tremor instead of healing. This left the Shadow Queen with 10 health and me with 3.5 star power. She goes for a Poison Breath attack, dealing just 2 damage blocked to each of my characters, and finally, I had won. An appeal with Yoshi brought me to 4 SP, and I was able to use an art attack to deal the final 10 damage to the Shadow Queen, vanquishing the strongest enemy in the game without ever attacking. This fight took me over 30 minutes to complete, which is one of the longest battles I've ever done in any sort of challenge for this game, ever. And so that brings us to the end of this journey. This challenge was a super interesting one to tackle since I've never been a heavy user of items or special moves, and thinking of solutions to optimize or solve these fights was a ton of fun. As always, make sure you comment down below if you think I should try to tackle the Pit of 100 Trials under these rules. I'm already pretty much planning on doing it since there hasn't been a single comment ever telling me not to do it after any of these, but I am also curious on what your guys' opinions are on me using the Strange Sack or not. Should I try to make it all the way through the Pit of 100 Trials without using more than 10 item slots? Let me know, I guess. The final thing I wanted to mention in this video is that recently I enabled YouTube memberships on my channel. I was reluctant to ask people for money at first because it's definitely a big thing to ask people to financially contribute to a single channel, but multiple people commented saying that they would like to support, which is super humbling and means a lot to me. And so I decided to open them up. Lately, this channel has been helping me pay bills while I'm attending college, which is awesome because it means I can dedicate my spare time to making these videos that so many people enjoy rather than having to go out and get some other job that affects less people. And we've all heard the stories about how unstable YouTube AdSense can be, so if you really enjoy the content and want to help make sure I can keep working on it, it would help me a ton if you're able to contribute. But if not though, watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing are already more than enough, and I appreciate every single one of you. Special thanks to these homies right here for being the first members of the Bringle Upper Crust, and if you want to get your name on this prestigious roster as well as see videos early and get exclusive behind the scenes content, then make sure you hit that little join button on my channel page. $4 per month will get you all of the base perks, and then there's a $15 per month tier that's just an extra support tier and only offers a fancy name color at the end of the video. Anyways, thanks for listening to my little sellout speech. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.